Hello everyone. So today we're going to talk on the concluding session of module 3, that is legal, and we're going to talk about sale deed, also known as conveyance deed. We're going to look at some of the crucial aspects of what constitutes a sale deed and what are the underlying steps. So successfully completing a sale. So this uh, type of transfer is covered in the Transfer of Properties Act. And by now, you all are aware of title of the property, and you are also all aware of the different types of transfer. And in the last class, I had specifically talked to you about the detail in which we are going to cover the sale deed. So there are two aspects of a sale deed. One is the agreement of sale, which is commonly known as Mana Khat in the local language. And the agreement of sale is a kind of a contract between two parties, which ultimately leads to a sale deed. You will be looking into that. So, say uh, you have a vendor, that is a buyer and a seller, who regularly interact for purpose of buying and selling a property. They will have to go through the process of the sale. Now, we'll skip the definition of the immovable property, but it's important to understand that under the Transfer of Properties Act, sale is a transfer of ownership in exchange for a price paid or promised or part paid and part promised. Such a transfer, in case of tangible, immovable property of the value of 100 rupees and upwards, can be made only by a registered instrument as per the provisions of Indian Registration Act. And the essential elements of the sale are: first, the parties who are entering into the sale transaction, the subject matter of the sale, that is the property being sold, and the price or consideration for the property of the property payable by the purchaser of the to the seller. Now, if we will see the definition of the immovable property, but we can look at the different steps involved in uh, ensuring that a sale is complete. So there are six major steps when it comes to completing a sale. The first step is transaction of the initial amount. So when the property is being sold or bought, usually you have the vendee uh, paying an initial amount to begin what we call an agreement of sale. And once the initial amount is paid, there is something called performance of the agreement of sale, which is again a drafted document similar to sale deed, but it has different conditions and clauses attached to it for this particular sale to be legal third step is to inspect titles. Now, in the previous class of property title, we have seen what are the different steps of checking a title. So this is something that happens during a sale deal, where if there is certain amount of time that is given in agreement of sale, usually it is 3 months to 6 months. And during this period, there is a phase when titles are inspected. Upon inspection of title, there are some formalities of sale deed that needs to be done. One of the formality is to uh, pay the full amount, maybe in parts, that is in installments or in full. And secondly, the vendor is required to give the possession of the property to the vendor, the buyer. Once the possession is given and once the vendor has received the total sum of money for that particular uh, property, then eventually the agreement of the sale is terminated, and what we see is a drafted sale deed which completes the sale transaction. And finally, we have something called mutation. Mutation is when the name or the name of the party or the vending is registered as a property owner in the sub-registrar office. And that registration process is called mutation. Now let us look at the initial transaction amount. Now, an initial amount of transaction can be of four types for real estate property. Now, we look at all these four types. The first one is something we call as a promissory note. That's a lump sum cash amount that is usually paid before the titles are inspected and before an agreement of sale is done. Uh, that is not a good idea as far as a real estate sale is concerned. So we will not talking too much about it because usually that is one act of what we call user black money in real estate. If you want to follow the legal process, then you have these three instruments. One is EMD, advance, and security deposit. So, what is an EMD? What are some of the principles of the earnest money deposit? So, firstly, it must be given at the moment at which the contract is made. Secondly, it represents a guarantee that the contract will be fulfilled. It is part of the purchase price that is consideration. It is forfeited when the transaction falls through by reason of default of the purchase. And finally, it becomes a charge on the property if the seller fails to perform the contract. So, looking at these five principles of EMD, it is very clear that EMD is one of the best ways to enter into a real estate property transaction. And the reason is very simple. Firstly, it validates the contract because it represents a guarantee. It's kind of a guarantee that the contract will be fulfilled. Secondly, it is part of the consideration of the purchase price. So imagine if a property is costing 1 crore and the EMD is paid of 5 lakh rupees, and that is mentioned as this is the first initial amount that is being paid, and now we are entering into this agreement of sale. It is understood that at the end of the transaction, after inspection of titles is done and if everything is fine and the possession is given, the remaining amount is 95 lakhs is the only amount that requires to be paid. For any reason, if the title is not clear or if the title is not marketable, and if this deal does not go through, the 5 lakh rupees that is paid initially in form of EMD, it creates a charge on the property. So that is very, very important. But for it to become a charge, it is important that the seller, that is the vendor, fails to perform the contract or backs out of the contract. However, if the buyer pays this amount of EMD and if all the remaining money is to come within, let's say, the next 6 months, and if he defaults, then it will not be a charge on the property because he or she did not fulfill their part of the duty. So it is very important that it will create a charge if the seller fails to perform the contract. So how is EMD different from the advance? Now, both EMD as well as advance, they are considered as a part of the total consideration. However, earnest money deposit is to stand as the purchaser's guarantee for his performance of the contract, whereas advance money cannot be treated as a guarantee for the completion of the contract. So EMD provides a guarantee, advance money does not provide a guarantee. Advance money, earnest money deposit can be forfeited by the seller if the purchaser defaults, whereas advance money cannot be forfeited even if the purchaser defaults. So if the buyer decides not to buy the property for any reason, and if he or she backs out of the deal, then the advance money is totally refundable if the agreement of sale says that this money was paid in advance. So while earnest money deposit becomes a charge on the property if seller defaults, advance money does not create any charge, which means that should there be a problem and if the vendor decides not to sell for any reason, could be getting a better buyer, it could be getting a bigger offer, he may not be in a mood to sell. The money paid as advance will not create any charge, which means that if 5 lakh is paid, he'll have to return the 5 lakh back. He cannot go into court of law and say, look, I have now this person cannot sell his property to anyone else until my case is resolved because the money paid was advance. However, if it's paid as earnest money deposit, then it does create a charge. So you can see that uh, an earnest money deposit is a better option as an initial transaction money as compared to advance. Now, how is earnest money deposit different from a security deposit? So both amounts are to be treated as a guarantee for the due performance of the contract by the purchaser. Now, EMD and secure deposit both form a guarantee. Both the amounts can be forfeited if the purchaser fails. So if the buyer decides to not buy for any reason, then some part of EMD as well as secure deposit would be cut by the vendor and would return partial payment back. But the key difference here is that while earnest money deposit is a part of total consideration, secure deposit is not. Which means that if a property is 1 crore rupees and if the transaction value is 1 crore, and if 5 lakh is paid as security deposit, the entire sum of 1 crore is required to be paid to complete the transaction. Once the transaction is done, of course, the security deposit is refunded. So it acts as a guarantee. It's not a part of consideration like the EMD. Another key difference is that while EMD has to be given by the purchaser, security deposit can be given by a third person. So you can imagine a situation where you are buying a property through a legal consultant or a solicitor or a broker. And neither of the parties, that is buyer and seller, trust each other. In that case, the security deposit can be given by the third person, in this case, a solicitor or a real estate broker, because he may trust both the parties that this deal will happen. And so he is putting some guarantee online to make sure this transaction is good. So then that has to be done through the instrument of security deposit and not through EMD. So EMD can only be paid by the buyer, that is the vending, and security deposit has can be given by a third. Security deposit can also be given by the buyer, but usually if a buyer gives, he or she would call it in EMD. Whereas if a third person gives, it would be called security deposit. So that's the key difference between the two. How much can it be forfeited? Usually 5 to 25% is the standard rate of reduction. Should there be a problem in executing this deal, that is the amount of reduction. But there can be 50%. There is no fixed rule of how much to be deducted, and it very much depends on the clause. But you could mention that as a clause in the agreement of sale, that if there is a default or if this deal does not go through, so much percentage of EMD would be forfeited. And again, that depends on the time, uh, as to if the deal is not going through in 4 months or 2 months or 1 week, depending. The longer the time, the more is the amount that is forfeited usually. Okay, let's go ahead. So, what is agreement of sale? It is governed by the Transfer of Properties Act and the Indian Contract. So, when you're looking at agreement to sale, you have two acts which are important in considering that particular contract. And both the provisions of the Transfer of Properties Act are made applicable on these, and there has to be a legally enforceable and a binding contract with the parties as per the provisions of the Indian contract. You may have studied Indian Contract Act in contract management, project management, at things like both the parties should be major, they should not be minor. The parties entering a contract should be of sound mind, they should not be limited. All those things. So all those aspects of the Indian Contract Act are applicable. Whereas the consideration, the time, the type of transfer, the title, all those things are as per the Transfer of Property Act. Now, so for deals of immovable property, it is never desirable to enter into oral contract. So, as per the Section 54 of Transfer of Properties Act, uh, by itself, it does not by itself create any interest or charge on such a property, and hence it's not compulsory to register under the Indian Registration Act. However, registered document only shows bona fides. Now, here, this particular slide is talking about if you uh, if you enter into an agreement of sale or a bank, let's say that before the sale deed, should you register your agreement of sale? Because once you go to register it, some part of stamp duty will be required to be paid. Of course, you are only making a small initial transaction and you are drafting an agreement of sale. But sale may or may not get completed. So, should you register it? Ideally, it's not mandatory as per the Transfer of Properties Act. Uh, However, it will act as a bona fide. So, if you have registered it, eventually, if the deal does not go through and if there are some issues that you have with the property, the new buyer in the future, when he or she does a title search, they will stumble upon your agreement of sale that is registered in the sub-register, which is good. So that any issue that you may have had with this particular property, in case it does not go, you will be able to address that. Now, how do you execute an agreement of sale? So, what are the key aspects when it comes to execution of the agreement of sale? So, you need to mention all the particulars of the party entering the agreement, like name, address, where they stay, things like that. Uh, you have to mention the marketable title of the property. You need to mention the exact description of the property that is being sold. Uh, you need a clause mentioning about the consideration and the mode of the payment. And this is very, very important. I'll tell you why it is important. Let's say consideration for a property is 1 crore, but that's the price as per the general value. The actual market value could be 2.5 crore. So it is very clear that 1.5 crore rupees is the cash amount. Now you cannot mention that cash amount in your agreement of sale, right? So you have to divide the consideration into three parts: part one, part two, part three. And you have to ensure that before the final part three comes to you, and before you can hand over the possession, all the cash that requires to be paid is recovered or is paid. And only after that should a seller give the possession and accept the part three of the payment. And that is the reason why you need a proper clause of when and how the consideration is coming. And of course, in this you cannot mention the cash out. And this is how it is done in reality, in practice. There is nothing new about it. Production and inspection of title deeds. So uh, all the titles that is mentioned, once you do a title search and you do the inspection, this is when you find out if the property is clean and there are no issues with the property. And once this is done and the consideration is received, there has to be a clause on the possession of the property as to when the possession will be given. And that is the period of completion of sale and whether a secure time is of essence. So whether this agreement of sale, whether these things have to happen in 6 months, 9 months, 3 months, that has to be clearly mentioned. And if in that time anything goes wrong anywhere, what needs to be done should also be mentioned. Clause regarding the period of completion of sale and whether the secure time is essential. So these two are same, but however, in this case, we're looking at uh, what if something goes wrong, what happens, and that is what it's talking about. Next up, who shall execute the agreement of sale? Now, the particulars of the parties entering into the agreement as per section 11 of the Indian Contract Act requires every person who is a major sound mind and not declared insolvent. This is something we talked about in the previous slide, that when you are executing an agreement of sale, these aspects of the Indian Contract Act will be triggered, which is very, very important. And when the property is jointly owned by more than one person, all the owners should collectively be called parties, and all should sign the agreement. So that is the key, especially in joint ownership. If the property is owned by HUF, which is Hindu Undivided Family, it is advisable that not just the Karta, one who runs the HUF, but also all the people or the members of the family should sign, and that is very, very important. And there has to be a special mention in the agreement that this property is being sold for the benefit of the family. and to bind the minor. So that is a corporate body created by statute of societies under Societies Registration Act are also competent to enter the agreement. So once we say that a person can or a joint ownership can be called a party, a cooperative housing society that is registered under the registration can also be called a party. In which case, uh, if a society is selling a property or land, all the members require to sign. This is true for all the redevelopment projects that are currently being queued up in the city. The document must be executed by natural persons having written authority from the body to execute the agreement. The seal must be approved. A partnership form is not a jurisdiction. So this is very important. So while this can all be called parties like HUF, a private limited company, a partnership firm cannot be a party. So if a partnership firm has three partners, it means that it's a joint property owned by three people, and all their names should be reflected when when the deal is being done. The partnership firm cannot be reversed because it is not a juristic person and it's not allowed. Otherwise, the same deed would be void. What about mortgage? So, in case of housing property requiring mortgage, most of the banks simply accept the sale agreements written and executed on a 20 rupees stamp paper. No registration for the agreement of sale is needed. Only sale deed registration is required. For land transfers, it is advisable to register on rupees 20 non-judicial stamp duty plus 1% of initial transaction. When you're looking at titles, you should ideally look at things like, is there a lease on this property? Is there any lien of mortgage on the property? So, or if there is any defect in the title. Now, lease is understood because a lease can be extended or terminated. Liens can be paid off, and mortgage is attached with the property, so it will flow with the property. So these two are not such a big issue if they come out. But any defect in the title is a major issue. And defect would be some charge if the property was sold to someone before and the transaction didn't go through, some amount is pending. Those are kind of defects that we have in time. Any legal litigation that is happening over bill or succession of the property. So those are some of the serious aspects when you're looking at tax. We already mentioned that the property has needs to be properly described in the sale deed. So things like all four sides, area, map, everything. Now, the mode of payment to consideration is another aspect we talk about it. So if there is no mention of the price in the deal of property, the contract is void and so is the sale. Consideration is very important. We need to mention. So you cannot have, a, you cannot say that we're not taking any money for this. You have to mention. In the worst case, you have to mention 1 rupee, but you have to mention. It's very important that consideration is mentioned. A clause must specify the total amount, details, and initial payment made, and as to how and when the balance amount will be paid, something we talked about, and clarifications regarding expenses like who will pay the stamp duty, who will be responsible to pay the registration charge, who will pay the advocate fee. All these are expenses whose liability have to be clearly mentioned. in the agreement of sale. The vendor is bound to accept any legal tender. As per the amendment in the Negotiable Instrument Act, bogus check draft would invite criminal prosecution to the buyer. If vendor accepts a check or draft which are false and the document is registered, possession is parted, instead sale will be considered complete. So this is the key aspect, that if the vendor does accept a check and gives the possession and registers the sale date is done and complete, then there is not much you could do. So this is something that both the buyers and sellers have to be careful about. And the key act that rules this transaction would be the Negotiable Instrument Act, which specifies what is to be done if the check is bogus or if the draft is invalid, because it would invite criminal uh, prosecution. And finally, we have something about title. So, as per Section 55 of the Transfer of Property Act, the seller is bound to produce a title deed and all other documents related to the title of the property. The clause shall specify when the seller shall produce the document in his possession for the inspection of the purchaser and the registry. When it comes to possession, vital aspects of the agreement and should be clearly and specifically drafted as to what states the consideration of the against consideration the possession is due. It is a standard practice that usually possession is given when 50% of payment is received. But again, there is no fix. Some vendors would require 75% payment, some would require 100% payment. So it's very much between the parties. If the property is freehold, then complete and partial possession is to be given by the seller. If tenanted, that is, if the lease, then the seller shall give a letter of acknowledging the purchaser of a new owner. So, if the lease is on, the, whoever is on the lease should be given a letter that now you have a new owner and your future rents would be payable to him. So those are some of the formalities when it comes to possession. At the stage of agreement of sale, it is not advisable for seller to part with possession. If done, the provisions of Section 53A, Transfer of Properties Act, will be applied. As per the provisions that the seller shall never be able to recover possession of the property, the only remedy would, with the seller would be to recover the balance principal. So possession is one of the most important aspects during the sale deed. That if you have received 50% of payment against the property and you give the possession, the remaining 50% does not come to you, what happens? Well, your possession is gone. It is impossible to get it back because there is a clear charge on the property, 50% of money. And the only recourse that a seller would have is to try and recover the balance money, and that too in a specified time. If the sale deed is stalled for some reason, if the payment does not come, it is very difficult, and the courts will take years to complete this sale because the possession is already given. And so this is very important, this aspect. Period of completion of sale. The agreement to sell must contain a clause regarding the period as to in what time it should be complete. A defect in this clause can be rectified by the seller by giving a written notice to the purchaser to complete the sale within a reasonable time, fixing a definite date. So that's about it. So the period, when it comes to sale, time is of essence, and so it's very important to have time that is attached with this particular sale. And in absence of this clause, I mean, the process can be delayed. So if your agreement of sale does not have time attached to it, it can just go on and on, 2 years. So it's very important that you mention as to by what time will you complete this particular thing? Okay, so we are going to stop here and I will continue in the second part, part